Hello, sir. How do you hear me? I won't waste your time. So my first question concerns Donald Trump's last decision to ease certain oil-related sanctions after a phone call with Vladimir Putin. From your perspective, as a security expert, what signals does this send to the Western allies?
The signal is that the United States has various priorities all over the world. Some are foreign, some are domestic, and not all decisions are being made on the basis of how does this benefit Ukraine. So when there are multiple crises happening at the same time, it really shows that United States may need to rethink some of their actions, also maybe related to sanctions too, which is of course bad for Ukraine and bad for Europe that these kinds of decisions are being made, and it also may show that the United States doesn't have like an endless amount of tools to force Russia into a peace deal at the moment.
Follow-up, could this decision help Russia finance its military operations against Ukraine and sustain the war against Ukraine?
Well, basically, any sanctions that get lifted off from Russia is of course good for the Russian economy, even though Russia can still continue its war against Ukraine, and we're not talking about an economic collapse at the moment. Of course, there's some economic struggle still. So of course, Russians are very likely trying to cash in when there are other kinds of crises happening at the same time, and especially of course oil is an important revenue for the Russians. So whatever they can do to ease their position amidst all of these sanctions, they will most likely strike.
These developments come amid rising tension involving Iran. How does this conflict in the Middle East affect Ukraine, and what new challenges has Kiev faced since the escalation began? Has global attention shifted away from Ukraine as a result?
Yeah, most definitely we can say that of course this kind of conflict draws attention of various parties towards Middle East instead of Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has in a way normalized in the eyes of many people because it has been going on for so long. So the generally, of course, the war in the Middle East doesn't have any immediate effects on the frontline developments in Ukraine, for example. But depending a little bit on where the war in Iran goes, it may have some effects and implications also towards Europe, which could maybe, in a way or another, ultimately also affect, for example, the willingness of various EU countries to help Ukraine. But again, in that situation, the war in the Middle East should significantly escalate. So if the parties there are able to come to some sort of agreement relatively quickly, the lasting effect to Ukraine won't be very great.
Ukraine relies heavily on air defense systems, such as the Patriot systems, for example. Since similar systems and missiles are being used widely in the Middle East operation, could this affect Ukraine's air defense capabilities or weapons supplies?
Yeah, well, that's one of actually the more immediate effects that this war may have. So of course it seems at least that it's difficult of course to say how many missiles US exactly has in their stockpiles, but it's been already talked about before that if US has to use a significant amount of for example Patriot missiles in a different direction, it then may have an effect on how they are able to supply them on Ukraine to Ukraine. Of course, they've now used them there, but then again, it's at the moment difficult to say how long will the war in the Middle East go on. So it's also possible that the situation will normalize. Of course, this may have some sort of effects on how much can the US actually sell to NATO countries and thus the NATO countries donate them to Ukraine. But generally, if already before the latest thing in Iran, there was already talks about there not being enough air defense missile every once in a while. So yeah, that also remains to be seen, depending on a little bit how this the situation there goes.
You represent the analytical organization Blackbeard Group, which produce detailed frontline map of the war in Ukraine. Based on your assessment, are there meaningful changes along the front lines, or has the war reached a stalemate?
Well, the war has not reached a stalemate yet. However, the monthly changes are relatively small. So, for example, what we have seen this year in January, the Russians continued their advance of roughly 400 square kilometers a month, and they this is a trend that has been ongoing since last spring already. So Russia has been able to continuously attack on a wide front. And in February, the Ukrainians managed to start some local counterattacks, which then had some partial success, especially in eastern Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. But of course, those also were local ones, like aimed to improve the tactical position of the Ukrainian forces. So it's not about grand operational moves at this point. And generally, you could say that the even though there's no full stalemate, every development takes a long time, and especially from the Russians, it takes a lot of men. So yeah, it's not a stalemate, but the war has transferred into this kind of infantry-heavy, slow grind, which has been already ongoing for some time.
And next question, there are growing concerns about security challenges in the Arctic region, particularly related to Russia's military activity. Have there been any recent developments, and how is Finland responding to these potential threats?
Yeah. So we of course observed that the Russians have expanded many of their brigades into divisions, also in the Arctic, and especially in the Arctic, there's been many changes. Expansions of brigades into divisions, the formation of new brigades, and also changes, for example, in the air forces. And all of these actions are aiming to strengthen the Russian force presence in the north. Also, part of it is happening in the Arctic, but then of course, a bit more south in other parts of the whole Leningrad military district, which also Arctic is a part of. A lot of changes are ongoing. Most of the expansions of forces actually already happened somewhere between 23 and 25, but then again, some operations are still ongoing. Of course, currently, most of these changes have happened mostly on paper, so the manpower is not there. Mostly it's in Ukraine at the moment. So there's been a lot of organizational changes, but then again, for the actual manpower of, for example, full divisions, it will take time before those ones are near the Arctic, near Norwegian and Finnish borders, or near southern Finland or the Baltic countries. So yeah, in the long run, of course, it tells us that Russia is preparing for a multitude of scenarios, which one is seemingly a conventional war in NATO's northeastern direction. But but that's just like one scenario. Just by expanding a few brigades into divisions doesn't mean that Russia will launch an offensive onto Finland or Norway in the near future. So the general security policy situation should go to a significantly worse direction in order for an actual attack against Finland and an attack against NATO to happen.
Many defense analysts say that Russia faces manpower and equipment shortages due to the war in Ukraine. However, there are also concerns about Russian military pressure near NATO's eastern borders. In your assessment, is Russia currently capable of creating kind of serious security risks for NATO's eastern member states?
Well, as long as the Russian forces are tied to Ukraine, the main Russian fighting forces are tied to Ukraine, Russia won't be able to challenge NATO, at least by conventional means, in any direction. So of course, in the future, if the war in Ukraine freezes, ceases, or some kind of a deal is made so that the active fighting stops, then it's of course possible that Russia will shift its focus somewhere else. Then the main question is that what would it do? One possibility, of course, among others, is that it would try to do something with a larger force. But of course, aggressions via different means, different kinds of operations than just divisions rolling over the border are possible. So they might try to undermine NATO's credibility and, for example, doing a smaller operation in a insignificant part of a certain NATO country, of the like Eastern NATO country. Try to what if they take a small island or just a small slice of ground somewhere in the border region? How would NATO react? That's also possible, so yeah, a scenario like Ukraine, where Russia would launch a full-scale invasion, is still, at least currently, it seems unlikely. But of course, it is true that the events related to security and defense issues can go towards unexpected directions. So while preparing for various kinds of Russian hybrid threats and smaller operations, of course, preparation for a full-scale war needs to be conducted. So, but of course, NATO has realized that this is also a danger. The defense expenditure of many NATO countries, many European countries, is higher than in a long time. So preparation is in the works. However, hopefully, just pure preparation is enough. I at least hope that we don't actually have to start to actually fight anyone. And the Russians also understand that a fight against NATO, like a full-scale invasion, would be also very costly and bloody for them.
Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your expertise. As a war reporter from Georgia and as a representative of Alpha Frequency Channel, I truly appreciate your insights and your willingness to speak with us.